Hello from New York, I'm Chris Hayes, and with me this morning I have Democratic Congressman Peter Welch from Vermont, comedian Liz Winstead, John McWhorter, Columbia University professor of linguistics and American studies, and Rebecca Traister of Salon.com. We were talking about Wednesday night's debate, but specifically what wasn't in Wednesday night's debate, because after the debate was done, I thought, okay, well, that was an in-depth look at basically three issues: budget and tax policy, Medicare, and the Affordable Care Act, and a little bit about Dodd-Frank. But basically, it was those three issues for an hour and a half. Those are the issues that are central to the Beltway reporting about the economy. There was very little about jobs and job creation, except in talking about how regulation kills it or small business references. But then there was an entire panoply of domestic policy issues that are incredibly important that were not talked about. And that's fine, but for the fact that there's only one more debate between those two candidates that includes domestic policy. And then we have Thursday night's vice presidential debate. And so we're talking about what was not in there that we would like to see. We've talked about contraception. We've talked about, I talked about gun control, talked about the medical marijuana ballot initiative that is in Colorado that's polling with majority support. Congressman, as someone who is in Congress, are there issues that you're tracking or working on or thinking about that weren't touched on Wednesday night and aren't getting talked about in the maelstrom of a campaign that's focused on just about two or three issues?
Income inequality. That is the big one for the country. I mean, the real challenge we have is that this country is having a declining middle class. There's all kinds of reasons, and we can talk about it as though there's some magic bullet, the lowering taxes, which is essentially the Romney deal. But income inequality is rising. The wealth that's been created in the past 10 years has gone largely to the top 1%. And people know it, and they're insecure. They're really anxious about whether their kids are going to be able to make it. Folks, especially around college education, parents thought they had some retirement security with the equity they have in their home, and they're having to put a second mortgage on it after their kids take out loans. The average kid in Vermont graduates with about $30,000 in debt. So what are the structural issues that are going to get us back on track where we have an expanding middle class? And they did not talk about that at all. It was just this back and forth on taxes.
Well, and all those issues go into that.
Right.
Gun control. You have, economic disparity leads to crime. Whether it's, or you're a woman in a family and can you afford to have a child or not? You and your domestic partner, if you're of same sex, the economy of trying to get health care and making that work for yourselves. Like, all of it plays into that. And that's the part that is, I think, glaring to maybe all of us.
And I was surprised about that there was student loans weren't talked about, because that's another area where Obama and his administration have something really positive to say, a great record, where he could have talked about. They had the weird conversation about schools where mostly all I remember is Mitt Romney saying, "I like great schools," or something.
I like great teachers.
Yeah.
I would add to that. That's something very important. And labels matter, and I'm not sure if there's an official name for this, but what you're talking about is part of a general problem, which is the mismatch between what passes today for a basic education and being able to have a middle-class existence. That's a huge problem, and I think that maybe 30, 40 years ago that would have been a euphemism for bringing up, say, the race issue. But now that's a race-neutral problem. Imagine the television show Breaking Bad. That demographic of person.
No one talked about Breaking Bad.
It was ridiculous. And then maybe they could have talked about the Jeffersons. But the point is that we have this entire group of people who are going to high school and coming out virtually unemployable, or they're never going to be more than scraping to get by. That's a huge problem for the nation. It's no longer anything local, and I would have liked that talked about. It's about education. It's about job preparation. Community college is huge, and Barack Obama said a little something about it. It was easy to miss it. I really miss that in this debate about supposedly the nature of the country, where anthropologists would have been shocked that so much was about taxes. Taxes are interesting,
yeah,
but
that's a
there's
really
more.
Good point.
There's a lot more.
And in some ways, our tax debate has gotten very very focused on, very small in certain ways. I mean, the tax debate isn't embedded in the broader issue of the prospects of the middle class, income inequality. The other thing that did not come up, and I think probably will not come up in any of the debates, and it will destroy me that it doesn't, is, the single biggest, most important issue for the next generation, which is carbon, which is the climate. And its absence from this campaign is just a really frustrating, maddening, depressing fact about where American politics is in terms of confronting what will be, in my opinion and the opinion of a lot of people, and certainly the opinion of scientists who study the matter, the single biggest issue. Here is Mitt Romney in October of 2011 flirting with climate denialism.
My view is that we don't know what's causing climate change on this planet, and the idea of spending trillions and trillions of dollars to try and reduce CO2 emissions is not the right course for us.
And I would have loved, I just want to hear someone play that tape for him. I want to hear the candidates just forthrightly have it out over what are you going to do? Do you, Mitt Romney, do you accept the science? Do you accept the science the planet is warming? And if it is, what are you going to do about it?
Why can't the debate be pointed in that way is a whole question.
Well, and that gets to the format. I mean, my colleague Rachel said afterwards that she thought the debate format died a death on that stage that night. And obviously the debate format is going to be very different in the vice presidential debate, and it's going to be quite different in the next presidential debate, which will be a town hall, if I'm not mistaken. But there's people who've been arguing, hey, just let them go at it. It's fine. And then there are people who are saying Jim Lehrer completely that was malfeasance on his part.
A different moderator might have left us with very different feelings about that format. If there was somebody who had reined it in, who had sort of called both of them on you're not answering the question, which is, who knows?
I think that would have happened a lot. Yes, certainly if a moderator had said, here's the question that you need to answer, and phrased it in a certain way and arched his eyebrows and just waited. What happens with debate team, the sort of thing that many of us have probably participated in. There's no reason it couldn't have been that hard, and as in hardball, but it just didn't happen. It wasn't what I call a debate.
You're really right about climate change. That is a huge issue, and it's all about our energy policy, and it's a question whether we're going to be in denial about this as something that's very threatening to the planet. And it takes a certain amount of confidence that we have to project to say that this is a problem, and in taking it on through efficiency, through clean technologies, we can actually create jobs, create wealth, and make a better planet. So there's an economic opportunity here. Vermont's we believe in it. We believe in efficiency. We believe in alternative energy. My wife is a total energy nerd.
This one was a smug lack of carbon footprint over here.
No, but I think the doubly depressing thing about it wasn't just that not mentioning climate, not mentioning carbon. It was the rhetoric around energy.
The Solyndra dog whistle.
Your energy projects have failed, which was a lie. The idea that half of what you funded are businesses, and that I was distressed that nobody sort of responded.
We are going to fact check that one. We actually have a fact check of that one. That was actually the most egregious lie said in the debate, which was he said you subsidized green energy at the cost of $90 billion, and I think half of the businesses have failed. It's totally, completely, absolutely, 100%. Yes, 9%. Yes. Yeah, we'll do a fact check on the numbers then in a second.
Well, and I was going to say that too. It's in this particular format where it is there was time to actually get to some meat of an issue. You bring it up in this debate, because as we go down the line and it becomes you have 3 minutes, it does become Solyndra, boom, you're out, and then
but how much
becomes that?
How much is this? What struck me is that it was very Beltway centric in the fact of the long-term fiscal health of the country is the central issue for the people that work in Washington think tanks, that are staffing politicians, that exist in the complex of the Washington media environment, and it's not the number one issue for the American.
Well, if I just real quick, and I'm sorry, but I'd watched the debate with 400 people in a room, comedy fans, regular folks, they paid $8 to see a show, who are the 47%.
Right.
We just came off of that tape in a week of it, and those people really felt like, why wasn't that addressed? And they talked about it, because we had a discussion. They talked about it saying, that is us. That is the biggest thing, that half of the nation was disregarded by Mitt Romney, and that doesn't come up. I mean, wow.
Yeah, that I think was probably, on that note, the most striking omission of the whole night, from the moderator, from the president, even from Mitt Romney himself, who, you might bring it up just to sort of dispatch with it. He was on Hannity the night afterwards. But I really do hope that we see that whoever is that the people who are moderating the next debates think to themselves, okay, that territory has been pretty well covered. There's a lot of stuff out there that we need to actually just get the candidates on the record on. It's this opportunity that you never have when you're covering a campaign. I would love to have either candidate and get them on the record on a whole variety of issues. Democratic Congressman Peter Welch from Vermont, comedian Liz Winstead, and Rebecca Traister of Salon.com. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Hey.
Mitt Romney tries to walk away from his hard stance on immigration, while the New York Times is confronted over its use of the term illegal immigrant. That's next. Immigration was another issue we didn't hear about in the first presidential debate, despite the very prominent role it played in the Republican primary, and in spite of the president's dramatic move to provide temporary legal status for some undocumented immigrants under the age of 30 who were brought here illegally when they were children. In fact, on Monday, Romney told the Denver Post that he would not cancel the 2-year deportation reprieves already granted by the Obama administration under the new policy, saying, quote, "I'm not going to take something they've purchased." This left open the question of whether Romney would continue the program itself. But just hours before the debate on Wednesday, a Romney campaign aide sent an email to the New York Times clarifying his comments. It read, quote, "We're not going to continue Obama's program. We're going to replace it and would only honor visas already issued." One reason I was frustrated by the omission of this issue on Wednesday night is that Romney has had an interesting relationship to immigration politics, one I'd like to see him have to reckon with. During the Republican primary, Romney repeatedly moved to the right on a whole host of issues. But his most extreme position, arguably, and the one that probably helped him win the nomination the most, was his rightward move on immigration. Romney claimed that Rick Perry was creating a magnet for undocumented immigrants in the state of Texas. He said that he favored making things so hard for undocumented workers that they would, quote, self-deport. And Romney signaled to the Republican base that he shared their views on immigration in the very language he used to talk about it.
Almost half the jobs created in Texas were created for illegal aliens. In-state tuition for illegal aliens. People who are here illegally today. Sanctuary cities. Giving tuition breaks to the kids of illegal aliens. 4 years of college, you're almost $100,000 discount if you're an illegal alien. You can't have any illegals working on our property. I'm running for office, for Pete's sake. I can't have illegals.
Language matters. The word illegal continues to be used as a pejorative because the word tends to modify the person and not that person's status. And that is why journalist and undocumented immigrant Jose Antonio Vargas wants the New York Times and other news outlets to stop using the term illegal immigrant. Here he is making that plea at an online news association conference just last month.
It's time that we retire the word and the term illegal immigrant referring to people. It is not only an inhumane term, it is a political term. It is an unfair term. It is an inaccurate term.
Jose Antonio Vargas is with us at the table now, a journalist and founder of the immigrant advocacy group Define American, along with journalist Brooke Gladstone, co-host and managing editor of On the Media, produced by WNYC Radio and broadcast on public radio stations around the country, and Maria Hinojosa, co-host of PBS's Need to Know and anchor of NPR's Latino USA. I've been looking forward to this conversation all week because I think it's such a profound and intense and loaded question about what language we use and how the language we use sets the terms of the political debates. And so I want you to make your case, first of all, Jose, for why news outlets like the New York Times or the Associated Press should get rid of the term illegal immigrant.
Well, interestingly enough, Margaret Sullivan, the public editor, she and I have had a very open, transparent conversation, and I really appreciate her for saying that. For doing that. In her column defending the use of this term, the headline actually was, "Readers won't benefit if the New York Times, stop using this." My question becomes, which readers? Mm-hmm. As far as I'm concerned, the use of this term, illegal, in many ways underscores the largely simplistic nature in which the media talks and discusses this issue. The way we've talked about it mostly has been very problem-oriented.
That's interesting.
Right? How do you, in some ways, and this is for somebody who's been traveling around the country for the past year and a half in places like Alabama and Arizona and Georgia, the conversation starts with illegal and it ends with illegal. That's all it goes to. And again, the conversations I've had with people looking me in the face, talking about these illegal Mexicans, a very kind of fluid conversation. Of course, you stop people and you're like, not all undocumented people are Mexican. And right away, I'm one of these illegal people. Right. Which actually brings back to this point. It's been fascinating for me. Once people actually face somebody who they think, right. Oh, you're illegal. No, so you don't have papers.
Right. That's
so we have so largely dehumanized this issue, and our job as journalists, I'm speaking as somebody who's been doing this for more than a decade, is really being more descriptive, in the way we use this term. Maria, who has been fighting this fight, as a journalist for many years, who happens to be of she happens to be Latina, right? I don't think this is simply a Latina or a Latino issue. It's not simply an immigrant issue. It's actually an American issue.
Okay, but Maria, here's the argument that Margaret Sullivan, the public editor of the New York Times, made, and the Times Standards folks made, and we tried to get folks in the New York Times on. They couldn't make it work.
Yes.
It is illegal. The transgression of entering the country is against the part of the law in this codification of the United States Code around how you enter the country, and people who are out of status have broken a law. And so this is a straightforward description. And undocumented carries its own semantic. It's doing its own semantic work, right? We shouldn't say that undocumented is neutral, right, as well, because undocumented communicates something. It has its own effect, which is to communicate this transgression is bureaucratic, right? This is essentially an oversight, right, if you're undocumented.
So the issue really concerns all Americans and using language correctly. I'm going to ask you a question, Chris.
Please.
Do you know somebody who has broken the law?
Oh, yes. I don't think I've known a single person who has not broken the law. Okay. I'm serious. I think that's true of almost every American.
So then, let's just say you have a friend who's broken the law driving. They've broken the law tax in terms of not paying taxes, broken the law in terms of being a bad father, delinquent father, not paying child support. So that means that now your friends are an illegal driver, an illegal taxpayer, and an illegal father.
Right.
And it's like, no. So I do what Jose does, which is, and it is not a Latino issue. It is not an immigrant issue. It is, frankly, it's not even an American issue. It's a worldwide issue. Who told me not to use the term illegal? It wasn't a radical Latino professor at Barnard College, okay? It was Elie Wiesel, who could not be any more different than me.
Right.
When I saw him, when I worked at CNN, and I took the opportunity to ask him, as a journalist, what should I do? Elie Wiesel, Nobel Peace Prize winner, survivor of the Holocaust, tell me, if there is an authority, you should be it. And he said, Maria, don't ever use the term illegal immigrant. And I said, why? He said, because once you label a people illegal, he said that is exactly what the Nazis did to Jews. You do not label a people illegal. They may have committed an illegal act. They are immigrants who crossed illegally. They are immigrants who crossed without papers. They are immigrants who crossed without permission. They are living in this country without permission. But they are not an illegal people.
John's skeptical of that, and Brooke, you guys just did a piece on this on the media, and I want to hear you both weigh in right after we take a break. We're talking about the term illegal immigrant and what kind of work it's doing in our politics, and whether it's working against us, whether it's working against the interests of readers and consumers of journalism, and whether it's working against the interests of justice and equality in terms of how we think about the issue. Maria, you just made a very compelling case about why not to use the issue. And John, you seem skeptical a little bit.
Yeah.
You're a linguist, so...
I feel, and I don't know how much my being a linguist creates what I'm feeling on this, but I hate to disagree with Elie Wiesel or Maria or Jose, but in the case of these terms, it seems that what usually happens is it's kind of like if flies have settled on you and you swat them away and the flies just come back. And so, for example, the term that we now revile, retarded, nobody would want to use that term. But if you think about it, if you wrap your head around it, that used to be a euphemism. The idea was to not call somebody an imbecile. The idea was just to say that somebody is slowed a little bit. Then the unpleasant associations settle down, and then we use other terms. So, for example, think about special needs and what that meant when that term was composed. It was elegant, it was beautiful, it was respectful. But let's face it, the same associations have settled down. And so I just worry that if we create a new way of referring to these things, the problems that bother us all are going to just settle back down on the new terms such as undocumented. For example, African American. 20 years ago and changed, the idea was we're going to use that term instead of black. Look how that's gone. If anything, African American looks a little bit dainty. It looks like something somebody came up with for certain reasons. It hasn't really had, I think, the effect that it was supposed to. So I just worry that changing the term is less important than trying to change the policy.
So now we're in very, I think, fascinatingly profound ground as someone who studied philosophy of language, right? Because the question is it the word that's doing the work, or is it or is it the politics and that
exactly.
the word comes out of? And then this deep point about the fact that usage is essentially what determines the meaning of things. You can come up with a new term that doesn't pack the same negative semantic punch that we think illegal has, but then that can accrue negative meanings
because
over just...
if the feelings are still in the air, then the term changes meaning just like the old one did.
Brooke, what is your feeling about this? And I guess more broadly about these kinds of efforts to change linguistic usage in, the New York Times or the AP?
Well, the big problem here is you never really know what comes first. Is it the culture that's changing? Is it the media that's driving things? Is it a particular group that's making something happen? Are they working sort of in tandem, going back and forth? I mean, you've got phrases that have been successful through time, but they keep getting relitigated. Affirmative action versus quotas, pro-life versus pro-choice versus pro-abortion or anti-abortion, and all the negative, positive connotations. You have the ones that identify groups. You have, queer was once a bad word. Then you went to sort of homosexual, which was kind of clinical and maybe medicalized. And then you went to gay, and then but you don't call lesbians gay. And there are things that are happening within the groups that you just say, well, people have a right to self-identify. When you're talking about a political or a legal issue, or an issue that is, or a word that is being defined by a particular context, as in this case, you've got a way more complicated.
But let's say this. I mean, just to push back on that, right? I think actually homosexual to gay is a really good analogy here, right? Let me just read the New York Times style guide on gay. Gay adjective. Yes. I'm sitting around reading the style guide all the time. Gay adjective is preferred to homosexual in reference to social or cultural identity and political or legal issues. Gay literature use homosexual in specific references to sexual activity and to psychological or clinical orientation. Do not use gay as a singular noun, like a gay, like your slightly cringe-inducing older relative might say. Gay is a plural noun, may be used only as a last resort, ordinarily in a hard-to-fit headline. And the place that I think is important here is when we say we grant groups the ability to self-identify. And actually, that's why I use the term pro-life. People get mad at me for using the term pro-life. But those people who advocate for it say they are pro-life, and I am not going to call them something other than what they call themselves.
Okay, so I would totally 1,000% disagree with you here, and I'll explain why. Self-identifying who you are is one thing, and within the black / African American community, there are different views of what, one seems like, as you said, dainty. You're walking around the issue, where the other one says black. Right. Black is black. Right. Say it. Now, but when you're talking about a political issue, and if somebody says, I want to define myself as pro-life, therefore my opponents are anti-life, you have allowed them to make to win the argument before the argument even takes place. Issues are different. I think issues are different.
Let me just, as somebody who's gay and undocumented, I just kind of wanted to jump in this conversation. To me, the biggest game
I think
changer,
of you as an illegal homosexual, but continue.
Actually, Colbert said I was border gay.
Colbert.
Colbert was border gay, which was
border gay. He loves to say a gay. But.
What has changed? It's interesting that we have this really evolving and growing immigrant rights movement, right? Yeah. And in the past 3 years or so, more and more people like me are coming out as undocumented, right? Which is an interesting phrase, because I've come out twice in my life and I'm totally done. Like, I'm not coming out about anything more. But have you seen an undocumented person with a poster that says, I'm illegal?
Right.
No, you do not. And to me, let's get to the politics of this. The memo that Frank Luntz wrote in 2005 that said you should refer to people as illegal immigrants to criminalize them. This is a Republican memo. So if journalists argue using the word illegal as a neutral stance, are we then listening to Frank Luntz?
The point is that there is no neutrality.
I'm not talking about a reference to people. I'm talking about defining an issue.
And you know what I'm talking about? I'm talking about real lives.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me talk about real lives. No. 1 second. No. I believe, frankly, that if the American people understood profoundly, like talking to their neighbors, talking to the guy who delivers their pizza, talking to the person, the custodian at their kid's school, like if they actually spoke with them about the issue, con corazón, like I want to hear, okay? then they would begin to hear the stories of things that I saw, as you know, in a Frontline documentary that aired a year ago, this month, that uncovered, because we went in with cameras, the truth about what happens, the real consequences when you label a people illegal, is that then we have privately run detention centers that have no legally binding standards, and you've got people who are illegal, and they are being treated as such by the guards who are being paid minimum wage. A whole other story about employment. Hold on a second. So then what happens is that all of the guards talk to the detained people. By the way, many of them with green cards in the country legally.
Right.
Okay. They say to them, "What do you mean you want food? You're here illegally. You're a bunch of illegals. Be quiet. What do you mean you were just raped and you want to report it? Shut up. You're here illegally. You have no rights." No. So the consequences of what happened to our society. And so I care about this. Chris, let me just finish. I swear, I promise.
Please.
I care about this because I chose to become an American. I made a decision to become an American citizen and gave up my Mexican citizenship. And so these basic constitutional human rights issues about what defines us as a country was what I said, this is not me, this is for Americans,
but the question,
for the world.
The question is the cause, right? The question is, are those guards, if the word is, I mean, the argument you're making is about the work, the psychological and social psychological work that term is doing in making it okay for those guards to act that way and for us to produce our policy, which I agree with you, but I do think that that's a harder case to make causally. I'm not defending the detention centers.
Why does Romney use illegal alien over and over?
Right,
why did
he thinks it's
you could have that exact same dialogue. You could stage it the same way with the word undocumented being a kind of poison.
Can you? That's the question. Wait, hold that thought. I want to hear more from you on this right after we take this break. We're having a really fascinating conversation that I think it really matters a lot, not just for this issue, but for all the issues that we cover, right? Because language is so important in how we talk about issues, and it cuts off certain avenues of inquiry, and it opens other avenues of inquiry. And there's a campaign right now to get press outlets to stop use the term illegal immigrant. And let me just say, for the Up with Chris Hayes style guide is we don't use illegal immigrant. We use undocumented worker. And there's two reasons we do that. One is undocumented workers don't want to be called illegal. And like I said, I have a kind of general disposition to call people what they want to be called, even when I disagree with them. So that extends to some groups that I call themselves things that I don't think is the thing that I would call them. But also, let me read this piece from 2007, which makes the case that, Maria, you were making earlier, which is just about the inaccuracy of the term. This is by Lawrence Downs, called "What Part of Illegal Don't You Understand?" I am an illegal driver, an illegal parker, and even an illegal walker. The offenses were trivial, and I feel sure I could endure the punishments, penalties and fines, and get on with my life. Good thing I am not an illegal immigrant. There is no way out of that trap. Yes. It's the crime you can't make amends for. Nothing short of deportation will free you from it. Such is the mood of the country today, and that is a problem. And I just think there's just an inconsistency in how we apply the adjective to the noun. We don't say, if a company has a Superfund site and they have massive EPA violations, we don't say it's an illegal company. So
what do you think? What do you think about? Let me ask you this: what do you think about, as a linguist? What do you think about the fact? Because my concern actually then becomes that the people, in fact, do own that term. The number of undocumented people who I encounter, que se llaman ilegales, ellos mismos, they call themselves es que yo soy ilegal, and I'm like. So what do we think about that as a country?
That complicates things.
As a country where you're saying go ahead and own it, but then we're saying as a country, we're going to allow this phenomenon to exist, that you're going to have a U.S. citizen children whose parents walk around saying, pero yo soy ilegal, I'm illegal.
And that term, for those people, means something rather different than what it means for us.
No, I don't know. It means completely powerless, isolated, disenfranchised, scared,
for
targeted.
Many of us, but then people adopt terms, and so the slip
queer
between language and thought is considerable. And in terms of this illegal driver versus illegal immigrant, I think we have to change immigration policy. I completely understand about the discrimination against the problems, but if you are an illegal immigrant, I think the idea that some people have that is more appropriate than illegal driver or illegal gardener or something like that, isn't somebody who's gardening in the backyard, is that if you have immigrated without papers or whatever, then while you are in that country that you entered, the fact that you are in it is a state that continues. You are somebody who did come and
So here's the thing. That's not legally true in this sense. It is not illegal to be in the country.
Exactly.
The violation is the coming in, which is illegal.
It's a civil offense, not
but
criminal.
it is,
Exactly.
It's also a civil offense, but it also is not illegal just to be here, right? The violation is the actual discrete moment of entrance.
Right.
Brooke.
I did not know that. No, I thought that your status, if you can be apprehended and deported for having come in, then it would strike me that you would still be liable.
I felt the same way. Which means we should teach people that. We should teach people that it really isn't the fact that
in some ways.
Illegal.
But if you can be deported if they get you,
this is a very subtle point.
Then
you're deported for entrance.
For the entrance, okay.
That's the thing that you have.
I just want to, in reference to what we did before the.
You want to go on the record for where you are.
I just want to say that I prefer, for a wide variety of reasons, undocumented immigrant to illegal immigrant. I don't like defining a person as illegal. It feels and it seems incorrect because you're not defining the action, you're defining the individual. So I don't. But so I want to say that. But when it comes to issues, political issues, pro-life, pro-choice, I don't like to adopt the terms
what the
of
group
the combatants.
If being an illegal driver and being an illegal immigrant really are qualitatively the same, that's an argument that should be made, rather than saying that it's something quite simple that everybody should have already.
Jose, I want you to respond. Wait, I want you to respond about why it's not the same, and I also want to talk about what happens when you wage a campaign like this if you end up creating the conditions in which the people you're waging the campaign against, the New York Times, for instance, can't actually let you win. Otherwise, they look like they're choosing sides.
Well,
political battle, right after we take this break.
Jeez. Okay.
Jose, you've been working to get.
I've been a walking uncomfortable conversation. That's what I've been.
A walking uncomfortable conversation about getting rid of the term illegal immigrant for news outlets. It's being used in our public debate, in our campaign. It's used in a very specific way. Are you worried about the fact that when something becomes litigated in the political sphere, and you're the New York Times, and you're saying we're going to make these style choices, that they are then in the position where if they stop using illegal immigrant, they then look like they're alienating. Exactly.
And again, I'm not. Frank once made it political. Like I'm not privileged enough right now to be a Republican nor a Democrat. I can't vote.
Right.
So all I know is I'm not actually. To me, the word illegal, right, is an entry point. It's not really a slice of the pie. It's actually the pan, right? I'm not talking about. To me, changing the term means actually broadening and changing and opening up the conversation, right? What is the difference between you and me? I don't have papers. You do. I don't have the right documents. You do.
Right.
So we are arguing about pieces of paper. And guess what? When we look back from this 50, 60 years from now, I remember getting in Lou Dobbs a few months ago, looking him in the eye and telling, sir, when you use that word illegal, there are 2 million kids in America sitting around listening to you or hearing that. What do you think that does to somebody? Mm-hmm. Right? So we are arguing about pieces of paper. And I think that's so important to talk about this. And look, as a journalist, I've been doing this for a decade now. I know, because I'm friends with many journalists, right? Like, the last thing a journalist wants to encounter is to be told what to do and what to say.
Yeah.
Like the PC police, right?
Exactly.
But to me, this is about a matter of accuracy and description. Are we being as descriptive as we possibly can be?
And you know what happens if suddenly I wonder what you would think about the conversation if we then, not that I do this all the time and it's going to sound really out there, but there are many people who say, you know what, who were the first illegal aliens?
Yeah.
Right.
The very first in this country?
The settlers,
the pilgrims.
Right.
The pilgrims.
Right.
So what if we now started calling them that? No, you don't want that to happen. And you know what? On the issue of style, I want to know who's in the style meetings and how diverse those meetings are. Because with the demographic change that is occurring in our country, that diversity in the media must occur.
One note I'll say is that two papers have styles don't use it, and I think it's indicative of something, that it's the Miami Herald and
the San Antonio Express News, the Huffington Post.
The San Antonio Express News. But those two newspapers, that says something about the business decision of who their readers are also, right? When you're thinking about, we're doing this for the benefit of the readers.
It's not just theirs, it's everybody's.
What you should know for the news week ahead, coming up next. So what should you know for the week coming up? You should know that sometimes labor strikes work, but sometimes that takes a lot of time. On Thursday, several dozen workers from 9 Los Angeles Walmarts, along with a couple hundred supporters, held a one-day strike and rally outside one of those Walmarts. Several dozen strikers is not national news. Anyone striking against Walmart is. The striking workers said they were protesting unfair labor practices, including retaliation for attempts to organize and for complaining about working conditions. Other Walmart workers employed in the company's warehouses in California have also recently struck, complaining about, among other things, 120-degree temperatures in the warehouses. Walmart said it does not own the warehouses, but told the New York Times conditions there have been addressed. You should know we'll be talking about this again if they haven't. The next time you hear someone demand more spending for national security, you should know that a new Senate investigation raises serious questions about what value the Department of Homeland Security actually has in the effort to root out terrorist plots. The report by the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation found, for instance, serious problems at Homeland Security's 72 regional offices run by local officials known as fusion centers. Among the problems, 4 of the 72 fusion centers listed by DHS don't exist. The intelligence they gathered was described as, quote, uneven, oftentimes shoddy, rarely timely, and more often than not, unrelated to terrorism. More often than not, unrelated to terrorism. DHS told the New York Times the Senate report was inaccurate and misleading. Senator Tom Coburn said of the report, quote, Homeland Security is probably the most ineffective agency in the government, adding, because he's a Republican, besides Social Security. You should know that the next debate in the 2012 presidential campaign will be Thursday night, featuring the vice presidential candidates, incumbent Joe Biden and Wisconsin Congressman Paul Ryan. You should know I'll be part of MSNBC's coverage starting at 8 Eastern Thursday night and led by Rachel Maddow, with Chris Matthews, along with Lawrence O'Donnell, Ed Schultz, the Reverend Al Sharpton, and Steve Schmidt. And when you watch this and subsequent 2 presidential debates, you should know what the meaning of half is. On Wednesday, Mitt Romney said the Obama administration put $90 billion into green jobs and that about half of those businesses they've supported have gone out of business. Never mind that $90 billion hasn't even been spent yet. Never mind that only about $34 billion of it was allocated for that kind of clean energy business loans. And never mind the Energy Department has only approved $16 billion worth of those loans. Never mind, the Romney campaign said later he was only talking about businesses that got those loans in the first year. And never mind that only 3 businesses actually went under. Forget all that, and you are still left with the fact that most government will be on the hook for those businesses that went under is an estimated $600 million, or roughly equal to 1/2 of $90 billion. Roughly. I want to find out what my guests think we should know for the week coming up. Let's begin with you, Jose Antonio Vargas.
You should know that a full 4.5 million young Americans have a parent who's undocumented. So when you refer to them as an illegal alien, you're actually talking about someone's mom or someone's dad. I think Mitt Romney ought to know that because in some of these states, like North Carolina and Florida and Ohio, there are enough Latino and Asian voters to exceed the margin of victory. So using illegal alien can actually alienate.
I think we never got to the alien part of that construction, but I think there's just genuine consensus that alien is like obviously manifestly
disgusting.
Not cool. Yeah. All right, we have total table consensus on that. Brooke Gladstone.
I think you should know about a 2006 fMRI study that was done about Democrats and Republicans and how they reason. And when faced with the hypocrisy or contradictory statements of their own candidates, and then given a reason to sort of think their way out of this problem, no parts of their reasoning part of their brain lit up in any unusual way, but the emotional parts lit up incredibly. And once they were done talking themselves into the idea that their candidate was okay, they got a super shot of dopamine. So you should know that lying to you, we are wired to lie to ourselves, and as the election proceeds, keep that in mind.
These are MRIs where you go in the tunnel and they scan your brain and the colors light up from where you're reasoning, different parts.
That's right, and they found out that you don't reason when you're figuring out what to think about your candidate, but once you've finished successfully lying to yourself, the reasoning parts light up again and you get a shot of dopamine. So it's just like Coke.
John McWhorter.
I would take a page from Brooke, actually. We have to realize, as is becoming increasingly clear in the world of psychology, that emotion plays a whole lot more of a role in our quote-unquote reasoning processes than we think. It's in Jonathan Haidt's wonderful book, professor of psychology at New York University, who's been on this show. And we have to apply that knowledge to, for example, the debates that we're going to see, where there will be people trained to appeal to the emotions over the reason that some of the wonkier or nerdier people among us might expect would run these debates. And it also plays into our immigration discussion in that we feel rather than we reason. And therefore, when we change terms, often the fact that the terms mean a certain thing in terms of reason has less to do than how society feels. And maybe that's what we need to do something about.
Jonathan Haidt has been on the show. I should just note for the record that book is a fascinating book. I am unpersuaded by it. I think it's sort of problematic and unpersuaded. As in other places, I just want to get on the record on the
It's a fascinating book.
Fascinating book. Maria Inoosa.
So I'm going to throw out another term that needs to change. Please. So you should know that the next conversation is minority, which is another term that I haven't used in my vocabulary for 20 years. Because what is a minority? And so, in fact, but we can also change the definition of minority, which is not necessarily powerless. And the other thing you should need to know, or you should want to know, is that I'll be in Tucson, San Diego, and Albuquerque with my new PBS television pilot called America by the Numbers. So if you're there, come see me. We'll be screening.
America by the Numbers. Definitely check that out. We'll put that up on our website. I want to thank my guest today, Jose Antonio Vargas from the immigrant rights group Define American, Brooke Gladstone from the fantastic public radio On the Media show, John McWhorter for Columbia University, and Maria Inoosa from PBS's Need to Know. Thank you all. Thank you for joining us. We will be back next weekend, Saturday and Sunday at 8 Eastern Time. Our guests will include Tom Stemberg, the founder of Staples and an advisor to the Romney campaign, and the New York Times' Nate Silver, author of the new book, The Signal, the Noise. Coming up next is Melissa Harris Perry. On today's MHP, affirmative action goes on trial at the Supreme Court, and the Roberts Court could be ready to end it once and for all. What's at stake and who's in play? That is Melissa Harris Perry coming out next. We will see you next week. Have a great week. Here on up.